Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to this February 12, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Opening in the news tonight, it's weather, friends, and more drastic weather to come. In the UK, storms have hit hurricane force levels as winds batter England and Wales.
What will nature throw at us next? As hurricane conditions reached West Wales, they triggered sandstorms on the coast and carried rain inland.
I'm over 60 years old. I haven't seen anything like this, like it's been since Christmas. We haven't had a break-up, really. It's been day after day.
Yeah, it's really building up the wind, and then you can feel it pushing your body and filling your clothes. Anybody would be advised to stay at home today, really.
It's amazing. Let's hope it stops soon, because we're getting rather fed up with it all.
Dozens of schools were forced to close their doors. Few wanted to hang around as the storm took hold.
Horrendous. It's the worst weather I've ever worked in. It's really bad. The 3 o'clock children have gone home and they were coming out crying. The sand was hurting them.
John Dunn has decided to evacuate his home. The caravans on the site he runs are being chained down in case they're carried by the gusts.
It feels as though I'm in the middle of a nightmare and somebody's going to pinch me and wake me up. But I know that's not going to happen. This is how it is.
For several weeks now, coastal defences here have been tested and found wanting. All people living here now can do is hang on and wait to see what the latest storm will bring and how much destruction it leaves behind.
As the gale swept inland, they brought down trees and mangled power lines, leaving over 50,000 homes without power. These are not seafaring conditions. Ferries were unable to make it on to the Irish Sea. The coasts have to be kept clear.
Looking at the waves, they are impressive, but it's just to be aware that there is a lot of debris inside the wave, and it's quite easy to get caught out.
These exceptional conditions have swept around Britain's coastline. At Lyme Regis, the waves grew with every hour. In Plymouth, seaside shops and businesses had to prepare for the worst. At the Met Office's own weather centre in Exeter, the growing force of the wind was clear. It's issued a red warning.
It's a rare warning. We don't often issue a red warning. Last time we issued a red warning for wind was 2 years ago.
Forecasters promise these winds will eventually pass, but Britain's brutal winter remains with us. It won't be forgotten for some time. Howell Griffith, BBC News, Cricket.
Friends, many journalists are calling the weather this winter the winter from hell. And they mentioned a red alert here, and it involves winds of more than 100 miles per hour that are battering West Wales and northwest England. And as you just heard, the Met Office has issued its first red warning, meaning there is a risk to life. And it's their first red warning of this winter from hell. And friends, I've got a Telegraph report just coming in, and I'm going to show you a video that we have that shows some details of how this UK weather is affecting the whole world, and some reasons as man tries to explain why. Now, you'll remember last week I gave some scriptures on how God controls the weather and how he's allowing the God of this world to have at it for reasons that relate to the seals of Revelation, especially that fourth seal that means more than disease epidemics. We'll explain that some more tonight, but let's take a look at this video first.
Violent swirls of storms pictured from space. Britain is in the top right corner. you can sometimes make it out through the clouds. These satellite images gathered over the past fortnight show a conveyor belt of weather systems. So what's behind this barrage of bad weather? Bizarrely, the story begins in Southeast Asia, with dark clouds over Indonesia. Heavy rain and massive flooding were part of an unusual weather pattern that sent ripples through the atmosphere halfway round the world. The best explanation from the Met Office is that there's been a kind of weather chain reaction. That heavy rainfall in Indonesia disrupted the jet stream which races over the Pacific Ocean. In turn, this bend in the jet stream far in the north diverted it over North America. This helped to create the conditions for the so-called polar vortex. That led to extreme cold, producing extraordinary scenes like these in many parts of the United States. And it's thought that what happened there had an influence ultimately on us. That's because the pattern of the weather in America affected the course of the Atlantic jet stream. It's been flowing unusually rapidly and driving storm after storm our way.
The British don't control their own weather, and it's part of the whole global system. And we sit at the end of the Atlantic storm track. And so we might be aware that these storms tend to come from the west over the Atlantic, but they don't just start there. The whole thing is part of this global system.
So what about a possible influence from us, from the greenhouse gases that belch out from chimneys? Could man-made climate change be making the weather more violent? Researchers say there are some signs that global warming may be involved. The waters of the Atlantic are warmer than they've been for 60 years. That heats the air and lets it hold more moisture. And the number of intense Atlantic storms has been rising over the past century. But working out a human influence is very difficult. Met Office scientists cannot give a definitive answer about climate change, but they ask about all the recent extremes.
Is this what we're going to be facing in the future? The indications are that our weather will become more variable, more volatile if you like, and therefore how we adapt to that is going to be very critical.
The Met Office itself was blasted by gales today. The question is whether global warming will make scenes like this more likely, something scientists are desperate to answer. David Schuckman, BBC News.
Thank you, David. And friends, the real reason why weather is going to be much more climatic, much more dramatic, actually, relates to one of the seals on this chart from the book of Revelation. These first six seals all are from the 6th chapter of the book of Revelation. The first 4 have been called the 4 horses of the apocalypse, apocalypse simply meaning revelation, and these are the 4 different colored horses of Revelation. The first one being the white horse of religious deception, Christ explaining, don't let any man deceive you. Many will come in my name saying that I, Jesus Christ, indeed am the Christ, and yet they won't preach you the message that I preached about the coming kingdom of God. They'll be preaching you a message about the messenger instead, and that's all. And the red horse, which Jesus Christ described in plain language, the gospel writers Matthew, Mark, Luke wrote him up saying the red horse, the second seal of Revelation, would have activities related to war and rumors of war and world war, nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. And the third seal, the black, described as a black horse in Revelation, Jesus Christ described it in plain language very simply as famine. And the fourth seal of Revelation depicted there as a pale horse whose rider is named Death, alongside whom Hades, hell, the grave rides. And that horse Jesus Christ described, as the gospel writers wrote it up, in 3 different terms. A little more involved seal. The first term that Jesus Christ used was loimus, meaning disease epidemics, the plagues of Egypt, pestilence. But Jesus Christ also explained this seal as having activities of seismic activity, commotions in the air such as gale force, winds of all kinds, hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires, floods, volcanic eruptions spewing stuff up into the air, and commotions on the ground, such as earthquakes and tsunamis, and again volcanic eruptions which start down deep in the earth, and floods and the like, and terake, meaning literally troubled waters, and that can mean both literally and figuratively. So it can be flooding waters. It can also be mobs or sedition, because that's the figurative part of troubled waters. But it's not the trouble, terake is not the trouble of the next seal, the fifth seal, the Great Tribulation, the mega trouble, or the mega tribulation, the Great Tribulation, which is a martyrdom of saints. It's the time of World War III. It's the time when Europe comes together in a United States of Europe that has 5 nations from the east, 5 from the west. They could either be nation states or regions that give their power to a new emperor, which the Bible calls a beast, who will most likely be crowned where all the other emperors of the Holy Roman Empire were crowned, in Frankfurt, Germany, which is the home, by the way, of the ECB, the European Central Bank. And did I say European Central Bank? Yes, ECB. Right there in Frankfurt, where they'll crown the new emperor of the coming soon revived Holy Roman Empire. And that's what we're watching for, things that lead up to that. But the news stories that relate to this dramatic weather that we're having with floods and hurricanes and all of that, that relates to your fourth seal, the pale horse. In many of these reports, we're talking about people who are being killed by this dramatic weather, either floods or cold ice and snow and accidents and what have you, just weather, all of that related to the fourth seal of the book of Revelation, Revelation 6. And even this next story, my friends, it relates to the ground, commotions on the ground where we have sinkholes that are opening up here and there. Just today, early today, a sinkhole has swallowed 8 rare cars at a sports museum in the United States state of Kentucky. No injuries were reported when the ground caved in at the National Corvette Museum in the city of Bowling Green in the early hours of this morning, Wednesday. Phyllis Thomas has this report.
A sinkhole has opened up inside the National Corvette Museum in the U.S. state of Kentucky. 8 cars have fallen into the hole, 6 of which belong to the museum in the city of Bowling Green. The other 2 were on loan from General Motors. Nobody, though, was at the museum when the ground caved in the early hours of the morning. The hole is believed to be about 12 meters wide, but despite the damage that it's caused at the museum, it's opened again for visitors, just shutting down one area, still letting people in.
Okay, and I'm sorry, that was Philippa Thomas. Not Philip Thomas, but Philippa Thomas. Thank you very much for that report, Philippa. And another sinkhole. A large hole has opened up on the M2, the freeway in Kent, causing severe disruption for drivers. Now, Kent, my friends, happens to be a city in England from which my mother has ancestors, one of whom was a duke. The Duke of Kent is one of the former Dukes of Kent, is related to my mom, and through him we trace my ancestry on my mother's side back to a Jewish lineage. And on my dad's side, it's a Scot-Irish, so watch out. I have this Irish temper from my dad's side, and I've got this cruel, mean side of me from Judah on my mother's side. Actually, though, my mother was one of the most kind and loving people, willing to bend over backwards to just be hospitable and kind to people. And if they want something she had, you better be around to protect my mom. She's going to give it away if people ask for it. But this hole in the middle of the freeway, right between the 2 freeway lanes, thankfully, it occurred in between the freeway lanes. It's a 15-foot deep hole, 4-meter deep hole that appeared in the central reservation, they call it in England, shutting the motorway in both directions between Junction 5 at Stockbury and Junction 6 at Faversham. BBC South East Today's Robin Gibson spoke to the RAC spokesman Philip Gome.
This is the hole, sandwiched between the carriageways of the M2 near the East Kent village of Tenham. As the helicopter manoeuvres above, another large piece of earth can be seen tumbling to the bottom. That's raising fears of further collapse, which could affect the carriageways. This was the effect. One of Kent's primary routes closed and deserted for 10 miles. Motorists have been forced to find other ways home.
It's been horrific trying to get round. It's taken about what would be a 20-minute journey. So far, it's taken an hour and a half.
It's going to be horrendous. I can't imagine how they're going to manage over the next few days if they don't hurry up and get it sorted out.
Perhaps the surprise is that we haven't seen something like this already because of the awful weather we've been suffering. I suppose we will see more of it in the future.
But the exact cause is not clear. Highways Agency inspectors are now at work trying to determine how much the weather was to blame. But they're also looking to see whether there could be any kind of structural or geological problem. It's believed that was the cause when a family car disappeared into a sinkhole at High Wycombe earlier this month. Tonight, the Highways Agency said it's investigating and will reopen lanes as soon as it's safe to do so. Diversions remain in place, and engineers are on the scene to try to discover why it happened and what to do now. Robin Gibson, BBC South East Today.
Okay, friends, so that gives you a little insight into what's happening really weather-wise when the ground opens up like that. It's could be structural damage, as he says, but either way, God didn't intervene and protect that from happening. But right now, it's just like a warning. Nothing serious, too serious, has happened on that. Well, in the United States, from which we broadcast, friends, the President of France, Francois Hollande, is in the United States for a 3-day visit. This is day 3. Mr. Hollande's formal welcome to the White House included a military parade. He'll be the first French president to be celebrated with a formal state dinner at the White House in 18 years.
Alex de Tocqueville, that great son of France who chronicled our American democracy, wrote that even as we marvel at our freedom, there's nothing harder than learning how to use our freedom. It's a lesson that our two countries have learned over more than 200 years. Standing together and using our freedom to improve the lives of not only our citizens but people around the world is what makes France not only America's oldest ally but also one of our closest allies.
And friends, interesting that the president is saying these things, that a president who's not from a tribe of Israel, and yet he's recognizing this certain closeness between Manasseh, the United States, and brother Reuben, France. Now, when I say Manasseh and Reuben are brothers, that's because Manasseh and Ephraim, the two sons of Joseph, carry Joseph's name and stature or status and position just as if they stood in the shoes of Joseph. And Joseph was a brother of Reuben. Reuben today is modern France. Ephraim is modern-day England or the United Kingdom, and Manasseh is the modern-day United States. And the United States, as it was formed, Thomas Jefferson had a lot of inroads with France. You'll hear that mentioned in the rest of this video here in a moment, but it's very interesting that the United States and Brother Reuben are forming a realliance, as if it were, and Reuben has in his blood this inborn animosity against Joseph because Joseph slid into the birthright position that would have been Reuben's had Reuben not been sexually deviant in a way that caused God to remove the birthright from Reuben and pass it on to Joseph. you know, in the case of the father of these 12 boys, the 12 tribes, the father of Reuben, the father of Joseph, Jacob, he used some underhanded means to steal, as if it were, or take the birthright from Esau, who technically was the firstborn, and yet God inspired Jacob's father, Isaac, to cross his hands and cause the birthright blessing to go to Jacob instead of to Esau. Am I telling you this right? Because the mother got involved. Yeah, the mother got involved, and she put hair all over. Let's see, which one are we talking about now? Well, deception runs back a little ways, friends. I need to refresh that by restudying God's Word on it. Some of you are going to be ahead of me and already know what I'm talking about there on that. But when we come down to Reuben, modern-day France and the United States, one of the things I wanted to mention about Reuben has been doing, again, this thing, if they would just look to the lessons of history and see whenever France makes an alliance with Germany, Reuben and Assyria make an alliance, the French-German alliances, it winds up always with Germany stabbing Brother Reuben, France, in the back. And yet, here again today, France is ignoring history on this and forming alliances. You see news in the previous months, you know, Hollande and the French and the Chancellor, Angela Merkel. He's been buddy-buddy with her. And, of course, Hollande, on the part of France, has played a key role in helping to put together this united Europe and the Eurozone. And France has converted its national money into the euro. It's very involved in the formation of a United States of Europe, ultimately. And yet, here, Brother Reuben has come to the United States and is reaffirming a reliance. Here, relations have improved between the two countries following so much in this thing here. And this follows the fallout over the invasion of Iraq more than a decade ago, with Mr. Obama saying here that France was one of America's oldest and closest allies.
Our military and intelligence personnel cooperate every day, keeping our nation secure and dealing with crises and challenges from Africa to the Persian Gulf. Our diplomats work side by side to help resolve conflicts and promote peace from Syria to Iran.
Okay, and I thought you were going to say just a little bit more there, Mr. Obama. In fact, I do have another video that gives just a little more insight into this visit, where he's going to give a toast to the French president. The French president, Francois Hollande, has been honored at a lavish White House state dinner capping a U.S. visit aimed at renewing the partnership between the two long-standing allies.
About American dining, de Tocqueville wrote, "The absence of wine at our meals at first struck us as very disagreeable. And we still can't understand the multitude of things that Americans succeed in introducing into their stomachs. So some things do not change." Thomas Jefferson wrote, "So ask the traveled inhabitant of any nation, in what country on earth would you rather live? Certainly in my own, where my friends, my relations, and the earliest and sweetest affections and recollections of my life. But," Jefferson added, "which would be your second choice? France, of course. And so I propose a toast To our friend and partner, President Hollande, to all of our friends from France who are here today, vive la France, God bless America, and long live the alliance between our great nations.
Actually, friends, I do love our brother Reuben, and as they toast in the background, let's go on to our next story, which relates to another realliance being made, as perhaps a very, very important one to be taking notice of. Officials from North and South Korea are holding their first high-level talks since 2007. The meeting requested by Pyongyang is taking place at the border village of, well, I'm going to let you hear him pronounce that in the video. It's thought that the subjects being discussed include family reunions and the resumption of visits to a tourist resort in North Korea. Lucy Williamson reports from Seoul.
I don't think South Korea has much to go on at the moment, and I think that's one of the reasons why officials here are sounding cautiously optimistic, or at least cautiously pleased, that North Korea requested these high-level talks. The last time the two sides tried to get a meeting together of this kind of level, it fell apart because of spats over protocol and details like that. Now North Korea has actually invited the South to talk at this very high level, and so I think South Korean officials are pleased about that and want to grab any opportunity they can. Having said that, there are many people here who will remember previous times when North Korea appeared to make diplomatic overtures to the South, only for that to be followed by more confrontation. And certainly we've seen in the past few weeks both more of those diplomatic overtures from North Korea, but also warnings about what would happen if the military exercises scheduled to go ahead here in the South this month do actually go ahead. And then the North has said there will be repercussions for that. So I think there is some skepticism here, but at the same time there aren't many opportunities like this at the moment in the inter-Korean relationship, so officials are keen to grab whatever they can.
And friends, in the last few minutes we have, I'm going to jump ahead to a story that relates to, see if I'm pulling up the right one, I hope so. I'm going to jump ahead to a story that relates to the new head of the Federal Reserve, Janet Yellen, who has said the central bank plans to continue scaling down its stimulus program. And yeah, I believe we got her ready to go right here. However, in this video you'll hear she stresses that any reduction in its bond buying program is contingent upon an improvement in the U.S. economy. Stock markets around the world rose after her statement, which came after a rocky start to the year, seeing a sharp sell-off in emerging market currencies. This report with Samira Hussein comes from New York, where the stock market has its headquarters.
It's been a little over a week since Janet Yellen was sworn in as chair of America's central bank, and she's already made the biannual trek to Capitol Hill. Recently, the U.S. has seen some weak economic data, including some lackluster unemployment numbers.
Has the weak jobs report caused you to consider slowing the pace of the Fed's tapering?
I was surprised that the jobs reports in December and January, the pace of job creation was running under what I had anticipated, but we have to be very careful not to jump to conclusions.
And friends, that's all the time we have for tonight. We'll keep our eye on how things are going with that and other things that affect the money, the economy of the United States, which affects the global economy. God willing, and the creek don't rise, friends. We'll be back again tomorrow night, Thursday evening, for our next edition of the day's news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd, saying, so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the COGTV.org video archive.